All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our genealogy club. Tonight, we're welcoming back genealogist Sarah Gutman, the family tree climber, and she'll be presenting Jewish genealogy tonight. So thank you for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for everyone who's joining either in person or live on the internet. So thank you for spending some time. We're going to be talking about Jewish genealogy this evening. I know this is definitely a topic of interest for so many individuals, and it can be really challenging. But once I think you get the hang of it, I think you're going to find some really great stuff that's out there. Just kind of knowing where to look. Um, so a few things that we're going to go over tonight. We'll talk about the challenges. If you've started looking into your Jewish family, you've probably already come across some challenges. Almost similar to the if anybody's also Irish, they also have some challenges of records that have been destroyed. Okay, yeah. So you're well versed in genealogy roadblocks. So some challenges that are specific to looking for your Jewish ancestors. We'll talk about some different groups that are out there as far as Jewish sects, the geography of where certain communities have settled, where they have gone over the years. We'll talk about Holocaust records and really interesting, um, I think, misconception about what has happened to a lot of the records after the Holocaust or because of the Holocaust. We'll go into Jewish naming patterns, and we're going to pop over to the free Jewish Gen website. I know a lot of people get either put off or confused, or they're not really quite sure. They think maybe they've exhausted Jewish Gen, but there is actually a ton of stuff over there that I think might be helpful to you, or at least as a jumping off point for other research. We'll talk about the different countries and collections that they have, some search tips. We'll check out JRI Poland, what to do with some translations, because we're going to be dealing with some foreign tongues and figuring out how to kind of decipher names and places and also the information in the records. And we'll also look at Family Search Wiki, which gives us kind of a roadmap. And Family Search Wiki, we'll talk about more later. Family Search Wiki is phenomenal for if you're not quite sure what to look for. This will kind of point you in the right direction. And a lot of the direction they're pointing you in is free records. So if it's free, it's for me. So let's go into the challenges. Well, if you're diving into Jewish records, I probably don't have to tell you that you're dealing with another language, and that's always really hard. And it's always, I think we take it for granted that the languages that when we're doing our research are going to be in English. And I was just not dealing. I was working with an individual last night, and we hopped over to Italian records, and she was very surprised that they were in Italian. So that's kind of what we're facing with here with the Jewish records. So we have Yiddish, Polish, Russian, Hebrew, German, and Yiddish. Those are the kind of the basic ones that we're coming across. So knowing how to read that, plus we're dealing with a different alphabet. So that's very challenging. We also have, which is kind of unique to the Jewish population, is this lack of surnames, especially with the Ashkenazi Jews. One second, I'm just closing the door for 1 minute. Hold on. Right. Okay, sorry about that. It was going to start echoing very badly. It's interesting if you think about with the Jewish families, this many of the surnames that we know of didn't even start until the Edict of Tolerance, issued by the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II, and that was July 23rd, 1787. So that is really recent, if you think about it in the way of your ancestors, is you're not getting that surname that you know of until 1787. So that is a huge challenge when it comes to thing. Um, the Sephardic Jewish community, they're the ones that probably would be identified in the records as having a surname the earliest. And their surname comes out in about the 10th or the 11th century. Um, but this is more in the Iberian Peninsula that this is going on. It's not hitting over until the Jews of Germany, Eastern Europe, they're not adopting their surnames until that 18th century. So that's really challenging. And it's interesting you think about, almost ironic, if you will, that it was the Holy Roman Emperor of the Christians that kind of mandated that people take on these surnames to identify as the family. Before that, they're going for the paternal surname. Um, we have endogamy, we have diaspora, so people are getting separated, where groups, unfortunately, with the Jewish community, they have this constant movement of where they're going. But what is good about that is they've always held their God and their people close to their hearts. And hopefully, in a lot of these places, even though they're moving, they are taking that family tradition with them. And as you know, of being of Jewish heritage, that Jewish tradition is so rooted in who you are as a person, the traditions, if with the holidays, ones that you've extended down to your own family. So, but those are some of the challenges, is you're losing the records. People are not living in the same villages that they have maybe in other countries like Italy, for hundreds of years.
Sarah,
We, yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. Could you just define endogamy and diaspora, please?
sure. Endogamy is we're dealing with almost like that intermarriage. So we have so many people within a family who's marrying um, other members of their family, and those records are getting confused. Very similar, which my mom gets so mad at me for saying this, but it's true, very similar to my family in Pennsylvania. So we had a big issue with endogamy. But that's, you might be looking at the records and you're seeing all these names that look familiar, and you might get a little confused because, like, wait a second, I thought that was that family, but they're actually married, or at least had children with each other. And that's also going to be confusing. Thank you for bringing this up when you're looking at your DNA results, because some things that you might be expecting to be maybe a fourth cousin is coming back closer related than it should be. I know my husband's family of the Gutmans, they, his I think his great grandparents were first cousins. So the DNA results, it looks like all these individuals who he's would be second, third cousins, it's coming back as a much closer match. So that kind of throws people off if they're trying to use DNA to help them do their research. Diaspora is when we think about the Jews being displaced. I always think of that scene from Fiddler on the Roof, when they're moving out of Anatevka, which is an imaginary town, and they're moving to America. I was in this play when I was in high school, in my Catholic high school. I was in this play, Fiddler on the Roof. But they're going to America, they're going to Poland, they're going to other parts of the world, and they're not staying with that family group, and they're being separated. So that's another challenge that you have, is these families just splitting off into different areas. And it's also, with that, a little bit more challenging to think of, because with so many of our other ethnic groups, and I'm going to use Italy as a lot because that's what I'm very familiar with. you have family members who are coming from their mother country and they're coming over to America per se, and they're all kind of settling this same area. That's not necessarily the case with your Jewish ancestry. A lot of times people are fleeing, and that's a big difference. And just the mindset when we're thinking about our family, this concept of fleeing and really being forced to move. I mean, having to immigrate in general, I'm imagining is extremely stressful, but having to immigrate because your life depends on it, by violence is a whole other ballgame. So that diaspora is also going to be a challenge because we aren't able to use um, this, our families all over the place. And again, we have record loss and destruction, um, especially with World War II. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But these places that many of these Jewish communities have settled have had record loss either by war, bombing, um, or even people just these hate crimes, just destroying these records, which is really sad. So if you are, and I'm using this also to in reference to DNA communities. If you've taken a DNA test on Ancestry, on MyHeritage, you're going to see some different locations pop up. So even if you are maybe coming back that you have family in the Iberian Peninsula, okay, Spain, Portugal, it's likely that your ancestors identified more as Sephardic Jews. So that's where the Sephardic Jew population is going to be most heavily present, okay? If your Jewish roots are coming and you're seeing on a DNA map, or maybe you've traced it back to these areas in Western Germany, Northern France, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Poland, Russia, Slovakia, and Ukraine, and you're more likely to have Ashkenazi Jews in your family. And this branch, I shouldn't say branch, this group is going to be speaking Yiddish. So if you're identifying some people in this area and you come across records and you're thinking, okay, I thought I was okay with my Hebrew. What's going on here? Why don't I understand this? They're speaking Yiddish. So being aware of the languages that are being spoken, and the different locations where you're going to find them, and these different groups also have different customs and practices. And it would be interesting too, if you're looking at your own life and thinking, oh, I do this, or maybe I don't do this, to kind of see, how did you get there? How did you get to that place where you are? What group of people was your family in? Um, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this one wrong, and please correct me if anybody in here knows how to say that, but the Mizrahi Jews, those are going to be your Middle Eastern countries, the Northern Africa, Central Asia. So when we think about the era of like Israel, okay, we're more going to find that community centered around that area there. So again, this is good if you're tracing your family back. I find a lot of people in this area identifies as Ashkenazi Jews. Now, I know I always tell people, don't get too attached to your DNA results because they're going to change, and they change every 5 months. So don't get like a tattoo or anything of it because you're going to be disappointed. But over the years, if you'll notice, it says here that Western Germany and Northern France have a very high Jewish population. In the coming years, and this goes for Jewish or whatever, even if you are very heavily French, you're going to see your DNA results get less and less French and German. Why is that? Well, is because they've made it illegal for people to test in France for their DNA because they've had so many upsetting results. So in some countries, they're kiboshing the whole DNA thing. So you might come back and think, oh, well, I thought I had family there, but I don't. So it's really important to do that paper trail. And also too, I've noticed with the DNA results, and if you've seen this, it might be different for you, but my husband and I had been, sorry, oh, okay. Oh, Jake, cool. I'm just looking at the comments. Um, if it had identified us as a percentage as Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews, and that has gone away. All of a sudden, Ancestry has me as being like 100% Scottish, and I have no idea where that even came from. I think my results got mixed up with somebody else's. But anyway, keep that in mind when you're doing your DNA. Okay, so hold on, my screen is, there we go. So a lot of people who I've come across over the years, actually, I was just working with somebody yesterday that had this. They get confused, rightly so, because they'll see on maybe a census record that it says that their family was from Russia. Okay. And all of a sudden, it then says Lithuania. And then it says Russia on something else. And it's like, what the heck is going on here? Well, we have these border changes. But one thing that's going on with the Jewish community, they have them in what's called a pale of settlements. And that's part of the Latin word. It's the palace, and it means a stake. And it's an area enclosed by a fence or a boundary. In my head, the closest I can think of is almost like in World War II, how they had set up those Jewish ghettos for people to live in. It was very common in modern day Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, much of Ukraine, and Latvia, that they would have these pale of settlements going on. And this was created under Catherine the Great, and they stopped this with World War One. So in World War One, they kind of started moving, especially with Russia, as Russia's going through Russian Revolution. They just started throwing the Jewish communities out, and they just get out, go find somewhere else to live. It's really a shame. So we have also to, where are some of these people moving to who are going to get thrown out of these pale of settlements? Many of them are going to Prussia, which later becomes the German Empire, and Austria-Hungary. 20%, and I'm just reading into my notes here because I want to make sure I'm saying this properly. 20% of the territory of European Russia and the lands that I had just mentioned on here had been set aside as pale of settlements for Jewish folk. And that's a large, it's large and it's not large at the same time. You think about Russia and you think about 20% of that area that we know today had been broken into these settlements for Jewish people. And think about like just 20% of your group, just of your country, just being casted out. And that's just amazing, I think, in a very bad way. Now the Tsar of Russia that comes into power is also, he's going to also have the power to shrink or grow these pale of settlements based on basically his personal whims. They're going to use data and say, okay, we need to have it bigger or smaller, whatever. But they will not be hesitant to just tell people, oh, you live in these houses now. Well, you're not living in them anymore. You got to move inside these boundaries that we're going to be moving. The land that Russia's going to set aside as these settlements, they are purposely picking out land that is not good to grow crops on, because they want to leave that for the other folk of Russia that did not identify as culturally Jewish. So they're giving them the worst land. So, but the Jewish people are a resilient people, and they figure out how they're going to make things work. And they do that, they overcome And I think that's a really good theme to always keep on when you're doing your Jewish genealogy, is the spirit of overcoming. And they think, all right, we can't be farmers, we're not going to raise our cattle or anything, but we're going to become shopkeepers, and we're going to be merchant, we're going to be artisans, we're going to be artists, we're going to be doctors, we're going to be known as what we would consider today as those white collar jobs. And I think that's really interesting that they just didn't sit back and say, oh, we're poor, we're hungry. They figured out how they're going to make their money, how they're going to work, and they developed these really tight-knit communities. Now they do have 1 in 3 families do receive assistance and for a Jewish welfare organization. So they take care of their own people, which is really nice. That they have this set up, that they say, okay, not everybody is able to be a shopkeeper, and an artisan. Let's help them. Okay, we're not going to just let these people starve on their own. They're going to receive some type of welfare, which I think is great. Now we also, this is another fun thing about different surnames and things where things get tricky. In Russia, people would change their surnames to avoid taxation. I believe the Jewish folk were getting taxed more. So they're going to make their names less Jewish. My last name is Gutman, Gutmann. My husband's family's name was Guttman. That's the Jewish way. They switched it to make it look more German, so that, as I'm sure in many places, that is more socially acceptable. But some of the things that they're doing is once these surnames come into place, they're switching their names so that they're not getting taxed as much. Families are also going to change their last names because they're more likely to get drafted into the military. So they're changing their names for that reason too. Now, it was a common practice that a Jewish man would move into the house of his father-in-law for a year or two, and he would study the Torah. And the family and any servants that would go to this man's house, to the father-in-law's house, would take on the surname of the father-in-law. So not only are you changing your last name when you're getting married, but you're now changing your last name again based on who your boss's father is. So you have that change there too. Just to make life a little bit more confusing. Any questions, comments, anything like that? Feel free to ask me as I go along. Now, one of the big misconceptions, and this was almost in the same realm as that people's names were changed at Ellis Island. Not a single person's name was ever changed at Ellis Island. During World War II, the Nazis were not instructed. In fact, they were told, do not destroy Jewish records. Why? Well, they wanted to be able to round up Jews. They wanted to be, hey, sorry, my dog's eating cookies. They wanted to be able to put Jews into the ghettos. They want to turn around and say, yes, you are Jewish, and so are these people. You're coming with us. Okay, so they're actually preserving these Jewish records. I was just watching with my kids a few months ago, and it's a really great show if you haven't gotten a chance to watch it. But it's A Small Light. I've heard of it. It's on Disney Plus, and it's the story of Meep Geis. And she is the woman who worked under Otto Frank, and she helped save, or rather helped hide, the Frank family. And when they got captured, she took Anne Frank's diary and held it. Well, her husband was a I think spy is not the right word, but he was trying to go against the Nazis. And a way that he was trying to do that was he was going to blow up the municipal building that had the Jewish list in it. And unfortunately, they blew up the wrong section of the building and they didn't blow up the records. They were actually trying to blow up, and this was a common thing. They were trying to blow up or destroy Jewish records so that the Nazis could not go in and basically go after them. So unfortunately, many of them are there. So with a lot of these records that have been destroyed, the records that are destroyed are also in part of Europe where everybody's records are destroyed. So we're getting Christians, we're getting Protestants, whatever. It's that area might have gotten hit with a bomb, blown up, excuse me, and everybody's records are just being taken down. It's not just the Jews. Now, some of the records regarding the Jewish communities and what happened in those ghettos were destroyed because the Nazis knew that they were having war crimes going to be placed against them. So the events that took place during that time period, during World War II, in these ghettos, the Nazis were doing kind of just an absolute scramble, being like, what can we destroy? But they're not necessarily destroying those vital records. It's more of a record of what they had been doing. We do actually have a lot of Jewish records available prior to the 1840s in Nazi-occupied Germany. So there is definitely still tools that you can reach. It's not all lost, which is really good news. So let's talk about some Jewish naming patterns. That can help you. These are some little tricks that can help you on later on. So if you identify as Ashkenazi, as Sephardic, or even, as I mentioned before, if you can identify what area in Europe or even Asia that your family is coming from, you can use these naming patterns to help you. So in the Ashkenazi tradition, a child will be named after somebody who has passed. So if you're seeing that a child was named after the maternal grandfather in the Ashkenazi tradition, that grandfather has passed away, most likely. So how's that going to help you? Okay, you can say, okay, so I have Samuel here. Samuel is named after his grandfather. Samuel was born in 1920. Therefore, I'm going to assume and look for records for grandfather Samuel prior to 1920, because that's when he would have died, before this child was born. Now, here's the other hard one. This is why it's important to identify if you're Sephardic or Ashkenazi. Sephardic and Mizrahi named their child after living relatives. So it's the reversal of what that is. So if we're naming it after Samuel, Samuel would be alive. So we would be looking for death records after 1920 if we're going to kind of be applying that same strategy for the Sephardic community. They also more common, I think, than giving the same name, which I think what we do in our country. I know my family, there's a ton of Roberts, there's a ton of Charleses. They would preserve a person's name by using the same letter as the first name of their ancestor. So, or it could also have the same meaning or same sound. So, for example, my name, Sarah, can also be spelled with an H, without an H, and it can also be spelled S-E-R-A. And I've yet to, in my life, in my 42 years of living, nobody has ever tried to name me, say, is it with an E? It's always with an A or H or without an H. So, but that would be something that would not be uncommon. That if you find that a child is named Sarah with an E, that maybe one of their ancestors has spelt it a little bit differently. And they will also take really big liberties with this as well. They can do names that are totally appear unrelated and just go with the same letter, or again, they can go with a name that means the same thing. For example, I think in my son, so my name means God's princess. My son is named Ryan, and one of the reasons I did that is because his name means little king, and I thought that was cute. We had the princess and the little king. So even look for something like that. Look to see what the meaning of the names are, and that's going to help you out. Do they have anything in common? It's kind of like that connections game that the New York Times is now playing, like Wordle, to see if you can get a connection going there. So before you go, and I don't mean go for tonight, I mean go over into Europe records. Don't get excited, I'm not letting you go yet. It's like my high school class that I teach. I'm like, you're not leaving. Before you go and look over at those European records, you want to be able to know from our country's records here the place of birth that you're looking for. And this is just typical genealogy stuff. Family grouping, if you know siblings, grandparents, as much of that family that you have chunked together is going to be helpful. We also want to know our Hebrew name. That is something that we're going to really want to know, is because we're not looking for the name that maybe what was I working on yesterday? Oh, it was somebody, their family was from Latvia, and their name was John in this country. And I think we figured out, because I Googled it, in Latvia, John, the version of it is Juho. And you would never expect that, like Juho, for that. That's the name that you're going to want to be looking for in the records over there. What is their name in that country? What is their Hebrew name? So where are we going to find this stuff? In American records, we're going to be looking for naturalization. Prior to 1906, naturalization records can be anywhere in any of the courts. It didn't until 1906. That's when it becomes under the federal government. So they ask a lot better questions, more specific questions, or where you're coming from. We have passenger lists, draft records, vital records, burial records. And I'll talk about burial records in a second, because that's something that's unique to the Jewish ancestry that's really, really helpful. So one of the websites that I really want to focus on, because I think it's really a phenomenal website. Now, Ancestry does have lots of Jewish records, and because of the World Heritage Project, all records with Ancestry regarding Jewish records and also African American records, they have something that it will always be free to look at those collections. So even if you don't have an active membership to Ancestry, a paying membership, you will still be able to see those Jewish-based records, which I think is great. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Jewish Gen. What can you find here? Well, sometimes I talk to people and I say, well, did you check out Jewish Gen? They're like, Sarah, I did, but it was like a lot of chat groups, and I don't want a lot of chat groups. And it's a lot more than that. That is kind of what you're going to get from first appearance. It might look like you're getting a lot of chat groups, but bear with me. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned before, that is very unique to the studying Jewish ancestry is these idea of these Jewish burial societies. Now I know my grandfather's still alive, and he's 94, and he was very adamant about where him and my grandma were buried. They picked out the cemetery ahead of time. They're very excited about this, picking out their stone. They would visit it, even though neither of them had died. They would go and they would look at their stone. I don't know, whatever. They would go to that and go to Harris Teeter grocery shopping. But what a lot of people were doing, not so much now, but before, and especially on Long Island, they would join these Jewish burial societies. And it was almost kind of like I don't want to say like a social club. Like, we're going to be buried together later, let's hang out. So I don't know, whatever. But they have these Jewish burial clubs, and there's a lot of them on Long Island. And these Jewish burial clubs have a wealth of information that not only on the stone, but if you call them up, they have additional records that you can access and get information from. So you can contact a Jewish cemetery and ask, was my ancestor part of a Jewish burial club? Okay, and it might have been a society. It was society or club. I'm sorry, I don't remember right now. I don't make it sound like the Mickey Mouse Club or anything, but um, they're part of this organization. So things that you can find in a Jewish cemetery, even not in a Jewish cemetery, they'd have some of these, but on a tombstone, they gave a lot of good information. It gives you the date and the place of birth, as well as the date and place of death. That's, I think, much different than when we go into I would say, traditional cemetery. You don't get that great information on there. In addition to their name, their American name, they also have their Hebrew name on there, as well as the Hebrew date, their spouses' names, and their parents' names. I am such a nerd. I like to go to cemeteries sometimes and walk around. I think they're nice. And in my head, I know what I want. I'm 42, but I know what I want on my tombstone. And it's all this really fantastic information. And I've been inspired by what I've come across in my research of some of these beautiful stones in these Jewish cemeteries. So I invite you to go onto Jewish Gen, and the way you're going to do that is you're going to go onto Jewish Gen. And if you look at the top tab bar, it says research. And I put a little arrow there to look fancy. If you go to the top there, go to research, and then you're going to click down where it says burial registry. And that's where you're going to be able to search. And it's not just on Long Island, it's all over the world, which is really cool. These burial grounds, Jewish burial grounds, Jewish burial clubs, graves, to get this information. And you can find out where these people are buried, and you can call, as I mentioned, call up the cemetery and find that out. Now, even too, if you're not finding it on Jewish Gen, but you hopefully will, you could check out a free website like findagrave.com. And that's good for anybody, not just of Jewish ancestry, but contact the cemetery and ask them if they have additional burial records that are not seen online. Now, another really great thing about Jewish Gen that is unique to Jewish Gen is they've come up with this AI technology of a search engine that accounts for Hebrew dates, and Hebrew and Yiddish names. So a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times, in a lot of genealogy websites like Ancestry, Family Search, they have these sound X's that you can choose from. That something phonetically sounds like, sounds like a name that we're putting in. But with our Jewish ancestors, it's not going to sound the way that we're talking right now. So they have a special AI, and I don't know how they did this. This is like auto magical, which is actually a real word, auto magical, that it can figure out what a name will sound like, what it could possibly be, what the spelling is, and it's going to search that way. So you're going to get, by using the search engine on Jewish Gen, better search results than you would on Ancestry, on Family Search. And again, you can do it we're going to the unified search. We're going to go into research, and you can choose. We have phonetic, that it sounds like it, phonetically like, with the searching for Jewish names and surnames. They said the best one to try out is the phonetically like. That's what's going to get you your best results for your Jewish family names. So now, what kind of things do you think could we find on this? Well, we have here one record. We have Sarah Schneider, and we have her, it gives us one of her burial records. Okay. So she's in Mount Hebron Cemetery. in Queens. And this tells us her birthday, her full name, her age of her burial. We have her spouse's name and her parents' names and a comment. And now we can also, just as I mentioned before, we can contact that society, Mount Hebron Cemetery, and ask, what else do you have for this individual? Which is really nice. It's a really great feature that they have here. Just checking the time because I get really excited and I'll just keep talking. I have to like temper myself. Okay. They also have, which is really neat, and I think many people are going to find this when they're doing their research, these town finders that you're like, I don't really know what this says. It looks kind of like something else. It's really fuzzy. They have these specific town finders, also known as a gazetteer. A gazetteer is basically a database of what a town was, what it can phonetically sound like, gives you a lot of great information. So say you wanted to look for Plinty in Latvia, sorry. It's going to give you other names that it might appear as. So in Russia, this would go. In Germany, this is what you're seeing. If they're identifying as Lithuania, Polish, all these different names that it's possibly going by. They're going to give you the modern town of that area. It tells you what it was after World War II. They tell you also too what it was around 1930, 1900s. So you can kind of check that out, and you can click on these links and it's going to bring you to these locations, and you can look for like, some of the records, which I think is just awesome. So now when you're going and looking for location search, you can go into this area here where we're going into the home and the different types of Jewish databases. So we have a few things that I think are really interesting. One is the Jewish Gen Gazetteer, and that's kind of what I was mentioning before when we're locating different places in hello, when we're locating different places in Europe, what they used to be. And they also have specific databases for different countries that you likely find your family. And so all I'm doing is I was just dropping down the page for this of different things. So we have Eastern Europe, Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, all these databases that you can search under for your Jewish ancestors. And again, when you go into Jewish Gen, this is not going to be right in your face. You're not going to go in and have this great search engine right away. You have to go into these individual collections. And by I say individual collections, with a lot of these, especially Family Search right now, as they're updating their websites, many records have yet to be digitally indexed as a whole. So while you might be able to go into Lithuania and look through the Lithuania database, those same search results are likely not going to come up and be as plentiful as if you were going through the main Jewish Gen search field. Because you're only going to get 10, and this is with all genealogy sites, you're only going to get 10 to 20% of the results from the main search bar, whereas if you were to go into the individual collection. So that's something really to keep in mind when you're doing your research. Again, just going down more, we have Israel, France, South Africa, Scandinavia. Now it's important to know too, my nephew right now, he was studying in Israel. And I help people get dual citizenship. And he said, Aunt Sarah, can you get me dual citizenship for Israel? And I said, absolutely not, because he would be automatically conscripted into the Israeli military. And we're not doing that here. So some people do think, okay, I am eligible to get dual citizenship. Be very, very careful with Jewish ancestry that you are not signing up or having a relative sign up for a country that they're going to draft you into their military. And that's different from other countries like Italy or Ireland. I just want to put that out there in case anybody was thinking about it, so you don't do the paperwork for it or anything. Okay, what else do we got? Some search tips. So when you're doing your search, look from small to big. Hold on, I'm just opening this door again. I just want to let my dog out because he's going to keep barking if I don't. How was that? What? I guess now that my dog ate his bag of cookies, he's done with me. So, um, and again, this is with anything genealogy related. Go from small to big. If you're finding that you know of a particular town that your family's in a particular village and you're not finding anything, go from the next geographically larger area, search that way. Use both modern and former names of places. Conduct searches in both a general database and specific collections, which we just talked about. And this is just good, again, genealogy practice for anybody is maintain a search log, especially if you're going into these individual collections. Okay, I checked the Lithuania database on this date and write down the day that you accessed it, because sometimes what they'll do is they'll just dump a ton of new records into a collection. And you might think, oh, I already checked that collection, but you haven't checked it recently. So just be aware of those things. So other Jewish collections on the that you might be able to find on Jewish Gen, you have the Yizkor books, and those are memorial books. And that's going to talk about the history of the Jewish communities destroyed in the Holocaust by firsthand accounts. And I had worked with one person who told me she had found an amazing detail of her family in these Jewish ghettos, that they had just commemorated their time. We have the, if I pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, Cahilia links. And these are member created web pages. So this is if you or I were to create a web page and invite other people to look into them. It's more of a community page. We have the Holocaust database, and that's a database for victims and survivors. And unfortunately, this is something that people need, people are interested in. And we also have the Jeff Malacca Sephardic collection. So those are all some things that you might find interesting as you're going through there. Especially, I just think those Yizkor books, I think are just really interesting. And also, yeah, just seeing what's happening, maybe that you wouldn't have read in a regular story. We also have here, this is the website for JR Poland. Excuse me, JRI Poland. And this is a really fantastic website, specifically for people who have Polish ancestry, that their families at any point in time really lived in Poland, and dedicated to Jewish life and what that was like. So what areas is this going to be covering? They're going to be covering also to the Russian, some areas of the Russian Pale, those areas set up in Russia to confine the Jewish people. We also have parts of Poland, Galatia, and Prussia in there. It continues on, but I was taking screenshots and it got cut off, but there were so many of them. So it does cover a good amount of area. So when we go into this, it has the database, and it's going to ask you about your search perimeters. What I like about this too is it's also going to search area. You can put in the geographical distance of something to see how far maybe somebody had moved. Also too, think about if you know your family is from one village, you might want to do research in the area. Was there a pogrom? Was there diaspora where they had to move? So are they moving quite a great distance at any particular time? Because you might say, oh, well, I saw my family over here, but now they're over here and this is, 100 miles away. And that's a lot for people that don't have cars. Was there something going on where they had to move, that they were being displaced? And we have a whole bunch of different record types, just like a regular genealogy website that you can look at. Try and get to the next page. And then we have our searching for surname. So I just put Gutman in here.
Thank you.
What's that?
Where is it?
I'm sorry. I think somebody said something. If you have a question, let me know. And it's gonna pop up for, which is also kind of cool. It gives you the number of records. So say I just kind of put.
Where went this spatula?
Oh, I think you're unmuted. I was gonna say, I don't know where the spatula is.
Hi, I just muted you, Heidi. If you have a question, let us know, but I just muted you, so
Sure.
we didn't hear what was going on.
If you find your spatula, good luck. Yeah, I'm looking on here. I'm like, where is spatula? Must be in Latvia. So what's cool about this website too is I like that it breaks things down based on regions. So they have within a certain area how many records are coming up for a certain surname. So if I clicked on something, this is some of the records that I might get. This is a birth, marriage, and death collection. And I think you can type on this or click on something to get a little more information. Another thing that's really cool is this website. It's by, and I think this is the last one oh, great, right at 8 o'clock. I was trying to speed up to make sure everybody gets in everything for 8. Because I really will sit here and talk to you till 10 o'clock tonight. It gets me out of doing my laundry. So is this website stevemorse.org. Now, if you are really into trying to figure out the latest and greatest in genealogy, what's coming down the pike next, you may have heard of this website when we were getting ready for the release of the 1950s census. This website was telling people how to go and find their ancestors' enumeration district based on their names. And this is a wonderful tool to use if you're looking for your family in US censuses and trying to find where they are based on their street address. And doing an image by image search. What they have here too is Steve Morris has a great feature on his website. And again, this is free. I believe everything that I've showed you this evening is free, which is phenomenal. He has a translating word from Hebrew into English and English into Hebrew. And he has it so that it looks, I think this is so interesting. He has it so it has the different types of cursive. So it like appears as that handwriting is being written. And he also has one for Yiddish too. So that is going to be really helpful for you. Again, that's stevemorse.org. It translates Yiddish, Hebrew, and goes back and forth to English. I've heard this is much more reliable than a Google Translate. Plus, it gives you the actual characters and how it looks in the different type of cursive during the time period, which I think is just awesome. Now I mentioned before too, and I'll just talk about this because I don't have the slide for this one, is second, let me go back to my page. Let's go back to this page. This looks good. Okay. Okay, just make sure I was highlighting the right thing. So, family search wiki. If you go to Google and type in family search wiki, this is kind of like a Wikipedia for genealogists. It's run by the Mormon community. It's being constantly updated, and it tells you what are some things you can expect for different regions. So say you wanted to do research in Belarus. You didn't know how to do that. Go to Family Search Wiki and type in Belarus. Type in Belarus Jewish as well. And they have a whole bunch of different categories where you can find land records, birth, marriage, death, um, all of that great stuff in there. It's kind of going to be your roadmap and your guide. And one thing I forgot to mention that is also a challenge with Jewish genealogy, which you've probably figured out by now, is that unlike with many Catholic churches or Christian organizations, there's not a giant diocese that's collecting all this. They have things in temple records, but it's not a diocese of a larger community of temples that you can get this information from. So that's another challenge. But you can, if you do know the temple where a person's from, try to contact them and ask them if they have sacramental records. I'm sorry, not sacramental, but if they have some of these other records for the community that they keep. I know my cousin is she runs a Jewish temple she's the person of the Jewish temple in White Plains. That was the first place in New York to document cases of COVID. And they sent her in to wipe down everything. And she spent like several days in there just cleaning the area. She's a great worker in case this temple is listening. She loves her job. Just like we're not complaining. So yeah, so they do. I know from talking to my cousin, she's aware of they have a really rich resources of records from the past few decades for people. And also to the Moyle keeps tremendous records. So that is something else that you might want to contact the temple and ask for the records of the Moyle. Because they're very interesting as well. With that, I guess we can end this part of the presentation. If we want to do questions, that I'd be happy to.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll do questions. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm looking at you, JF. You asked me if I know Ruth Gruber. I don't know who that is. Can you?
All
Do
right,
you?
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop that. Sorry.
Oh,